Greetings, friends. Europe is preparing for war, taking new steps and entering new stages. This demonstrates that all of Europe, primarily Poland and the Baltic countries, will probably be ready for active defense in the coming months. This will keep improving in the years ahead. This, in my opinion, is very important information for Ukrainians living in Europe, so that they can feel safe. We'll discuss what you need to prepare for, so watch until the end and support with a like, comment, and subscription. Thank you to each and every one of you. Also, by the way, we have information that the same Polish farmers and carriers who blocked the Ukrainian border because of Ukrainian grain, now, in fact, they already regret their decision and say that they are barely making ends meet because there is no Ukrainian grain in Poland. It's a kind of paradox, but we talked about this a year and a half ago, when it was all in full swing, that the day would come when they would actually ask for Ukrainian grain to keep passing through their territory. But let's take everything step by step. First of all, the Financial Times writes that the European Union authorities will modernize railway lines to quickly transfer troops in case of war with Russia. This will reduce the time needed to transport troops from the west to the east of the bloc from weeks and months to just a few hours. That means the railway has to be rebuilt and optimized to speed up this process dozens of times. So, in order to make sure that the troops currently stationed there can be moved in the shortest possible time, closer to the west, closer to Great Britain, so that these troops could, for example, be on the territory of Poland or the Baltic countries within just a few hours. Because this is, as we remember, even after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the first hours were the ones during which Russia captured the most Ukrainian territory, basically just marching through the entire south. That's the story. Go on. According to the European Union's Transport Commissioner, the European Union's transport routes are currently unsuitable for the rapid movement of tanks, infantry, and military cargo. Combat vehicles will get stuck in tunnels, collapse bridges, and become entangled in border bureaucracy. The European Union Transport Agency plans to modernize 500 infrastructure facilities along 4 military corridors. That stretch across the entire continent. The project was developed jointly with NATO, and its cost is estimated, just imagine, at a staggering 17 billion euros. Next, regarding Polish carriers. A very, very interesting point, because we all remember the blockades of the Ukrainian borders when Ukrainian drivers stood for weeks, even months, in winter, some distance from the border. And right after the parliamentary elections, the protesters blocked these borders and wouldn't let them pass. And they were saying that Ukrainian grain was seriously harming the Polish economy and so on. But now those same carriers, well, maybe not exactly the same carriers, but the carriers who blocked the border, who actually started the blockade, because later the farmers joined them, are now giving very alarming signals for the Polish carriers. Polish carriers are suffering losses due to the lack of Ukrainian grain. This was stated in the statement of the chief executive officer of the logistics company, CSL Group, Laura Holowak, who is quoted by the Polish industry publication Infrastructure Market. We understand that the leakage of Ukrainian raw materials, agricultural products, and grain into the Polish market is a bad thing, and this should never happen. However, we need to distinguish between two things: permission for transit, which means allowing profits for Polish ports and transshipment terminals, and permission for selling goods. We believe blocking Ukrainian product transshipment in Poland is painful. The company noted that the lack of transshipment of Ukrainian grain for more than a year threatens mass layoffs and losses, and they urged the government to analyze the current situation. Logistics experts cite Romania, Germany, and Turkey, which move large amounts of Ukrainian grain through their ports without allowing it into their markets. And I also want to remind you that the transit of Ukrainian grain, and not only grain, was suspended through the Polish border in order to, let's say, reconcile the Polish authorities with the Polish, At that time, not carriers anymore, but farmers. And even then, there was one single and very logical question. Because the Ukrainian grain sales embargo was already in effect. Why ban transit if this grain doesn't stay in Poland anyway? And everything that was transported went either by rail or by trucks. And it just passed through Polish territory to Lithuania, as well as to Germany. And through these ports already, and also to the ports of Gdansk, of course, because these are some of the largest ports in the Baltic Sea. And then a logical question arose for these same farmers. Why block the transit if this grain doesn't stay with you anyway and isn't sold to you anyway? There was no logical answer at that time. Then they banned this transit for Ukraine. Everyone was satisfied and the rallies ended. It was a very, very painful blow at that time for Ukrainian farmers, for Ukrainian grain traders, because they already had to look for some new options to transport this grain. And then a very good event happened. That's when the ports in the Black Sea were unblocked, and somehow now the grain is being transported there. So the territory of Poland itself is not as critically important now as it was a year and a half or 2 years ago. And of course it was logical. If this transit, not ideal. Through the territory of Poland, both Polish entrepreneurs involved in transportation and transshipment and so on, as well as the Polish budget itself, will simply receive less money because others, for example, will be getting that money instead. Romanians, yes, or anyone else, through whom this grain was transported through the Black Sea. That's it. And now it's not that critical anymore. And even if they lift this ban now, I'm not sure that a large amount of Ukrainian grain will start going through Poland again. I just don't have that kind of opinion, because again, this topic will always remain very manipulative and very serious. Yes, and at the very least, Ukrainian entrepreneurs will understand that the day may come again when these ports might once again be blocked. Not the ports, but the borders will be blocked again. And once again, these drivers won't be able to transport the goods Ukraine needs back and forth. Because we remember that back then, actually, getting into Ukraine, if we're talking about trucks and back the other way, was very difficult. And basically, it didn't matter what goods were being transported, either from Ukraine or to Ukraine. So that's roughly how the story went. Also, there's another very interesting... The law was signed by Zelensky. This is the law recognizing as deported those Ukrainians who were expelled from Poland between 1944 and 1951. The text of the law states that Ukraine recognizes the deportation, particularly from Poland in 1944-1951, as illegal and criminal acts. It is also stated that the decision to forcibly resettle Ukrainians was made by the authorities of the former Union of Soviet Socialist Republics and the Polish People's Republic. Such wording is in the law. The law also offers compensation and social guarantees to deported persons and their descendants. The head of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Andriy Sybiha, stated that the signing of the documents restores the memory of forcibly deported Ukrainians from the territory of Poland. The Ukrainian state will continue to systematically work to ensure that every crime of the totalitarian Soviet regime is properly evaluated and condemned. This also applies to the successor of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, Russia, which even today continues to kill and abduct our citizens on a daily basis. That's the story, my friends. This law, well, if it were to be enacted, I think it would have been much better if this law had been enacted years ago. 30 years ago, yes, that would have been logical, because now, today, most of the people who were deported between 1944 and 1951 are either already at a very old age, let's say, or most of them are probably no longer alive, if you look at some statistics. But in terms of historical justice, I guess it's a good thing. Share your thoughts in the comments. It'll be interesting to read your opinions, friends. Thanks for your likes, comments, subscriptions, and for watching until the end. Have a great day. See you next time.